The Olympic Games were built on a promise that for a few weeks, the world's best athletes would gather in one place, compete with honor, and return home safely. Most of the time, that promise holds, but not always. Sometimes, the stadiums that were meant to celebrate human achievement became the backdrop for something far darker. Sometimes, the athletes who trained their entire lives to stand on that stage never made it home. And sometimes, the crowds who came to cheer found themselves caught in something they couldn't have imagined. The Olympics have been touched by terrorism, by catastrophic failure, by the quiet dangers of competition pushed to its absolute limit, and by negligence that cost people their lives. These weren't freak events that came from nowhere. Each one had a build-up, each one had warning signs, and each one left a wound that the Games never fully recovered from. Here are 5 of the most horrifying Olympic Games tragedies. It was September 5th, 1972, in Munich, West Germany, and the Summer Olympics were less than halfway through when everything changed. The 1972 Games had been deliberately designed to feel open and welcoming. West Germany wanted to draw a clear line between itself and the memory of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, which had been staged under the shadow of the Nazi regime. So, in 1972, the security was kept deliberately light. The fences were low. The checkpoints were minimal. Athletes moved freely in and out of the Olympic Village. Organizers spent less than $2 million on security, and the guards were unarmed. It was supposed to feel like a celebration. They even had a name for it: Die Heiteren Spiele, the Cheerful Games. At 4:30 in the morning, 8 members of a Palestinian militant group called Black September scaled a 6-foot fence surrounding the Olympic Village. They were disguised as athletes, carrying duffel bags that held rifles and grenades. Some athletes who were returning late from a night at the theater actually helped them over the fence, assuming they were fellow competitors sneaking back in after curfew. The group moved directly to 31 Connollystrasse, the building housing the Israeli delegation. Wrestling referee Josef Gutfreund was the first to hear something wrong. He threw his weight against the apartment door as it began to open, buying just enough time for some of his teammates to escape or hide. But the militants forced their way in. Wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg fought back and was shot. Weightlifter Yosef Romano, competing on crutches from an injury, also tried to disarm one of the attackers and was killed. His body was left on the floor of the apartment as a warning to the remaining 9 hostages. What followed was a standoff that stretched through the entire day, broadcast live on television to an estimated 1 billion people around the world. The German authorities negotiated without a clear plan. Israel refused to release the more than 200 Palestinian prisoners that Black September was demanding. Hours passed with no resolution. By evening, German authorities had agreed to transport the hostages and the militants by helicopter to a military airfield at Fürstenfeldbruck, under the pretense that a plane would be waiting to fly them out of the country. It was meant to be a trap. It failed on almost every level. The police snipers positioned at the airfield had no formal sharpshooting training. They had no helmets, no bulletproof vests, no night vision equipment, and no radios to communicate with each other or with commanders. They also believed there were only 5 militants, when in fact, there were 8. A Boeing 727 sat on the tarmac, filled with police officers disguised as a flight crew, meant to overpower the militants when they boarded. Before the helicopters even landed, those officers voted among themselves and abandoned their posts. When 2 militants walked to the plane and found it empty, they ran back toward the helicopters and the shooting started. The airfield fell into chaos. The floodlights were shot out. Armored vehicles dispatched to help got stuck in traffic and arrived too late. Just past midnight, 1 militant opened fire into the first helicopter, killing 3 of the hostages. Another threw a grenade into the same helicopter, killing the remaining hostages aboard through the explosion and smoke. A second militant sprayed the interior of the other helicopter with gunfire, killing the 5 hostages bound inside. By 12:30 in the morning on September 6th, it was over. 11 members of the Israeli team were dead. 1 West German police officer was killed. 5 of the 8 militants were also dead. The International Olympic Committee suspended the Games for 1 day, held a memorial service, and then ordered competition to resume. The Israeli team left Munich entirely. 11 men had come to compete. None of them made it home. It was just after 1 in the morning on July 27, 1996, in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Summer Olympics were 11 days in, when a pipe bomb hidden inside a green military backpack detonated beneath a bench near a concert sound tower in Centennial Olympic Park. The park had been one of the defining features of the 1996 Games. It was designed as a public town square in the heart of downtown Atlanta, free to enter, built so that anyone who couldn't afford tickets to the actual events could still feel part of the celebration. On the night of the bombing, thousands of people were packed inside it. A band called Jack Mack and the Heart Attack was performing. The crowd was loud and loose, the way late-night concert crowds tend to be, completely unguarded. A 911 call had come in roughly 18 minutes before the blast, warning that a bomb would go off in the park within 30 minutes. Security guard Richard Jewell spotted the unattended backpack under a bench, alerted officers from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and began pushing spectators away from the area. The bomb squad was called in. An evacuation of the immediate area began. The bomb went off 2 to 3 minutes into that evacuation before the crowd could clear. The device had been packed with masonry nails 3 inches long. When it detonated, those nails tore through the people nearest to it. Alice Hawthorne, 44 years old, from Albany, Georgia, had brought her teenage daughter to Atlanta to experience the Olympics. A nail from the bomb struck her in the head. She was gone before she could be moved. A Turkish television cameraman named Melih Uzunyol, who had survived wars in Azerbaijan, Bosnia, and the Persian Gulf, suffered a fatal heart attack while running toward the scene. More than 100 others were injured. The investigation that followed became a separate kind of disaster. Within days, the FBI had focused its attention on Richard Jewell, the same man who had found the bag and helped move people away from it. His name was leaked to the press before any charges were filed, before any arrest was made, before any real case existed against him. The coverage was immediate and unrelenting. Reporters camped outside his home. His background was picked apart on national television. He was tried in public while investigators were still trying to build a case that ultimately never held together. In October 1996, the FBI cleared Jewell entirely. He had nothing to do with it. The real bomber was Eric Rudolph, a carpenter from North Carolina who described his motive in plain terms. He wanted to embarrass the United States government, disrupt the Games, and protest what he called the promotion of global socialism and abortion. He had built the device himself, placed it deliberately, and walked away. After Atlanta, he carried out 3 more bombings at abortion clinics and a gay nightclub before vanishing into the mountains of western North Carolina. He survived out there for 5 years. A rookie police officer finally found him behind a grocery store in Murphy, North Carolina, in May 2003. 2 years later, Rudolph pleaded guilty to all 4 bombings to avoid a death sentence. He is serving life in prison. Richard Jewell spent the years between his clearance and his death in 2007 fighting defamation lawsuits against the news organizations that had destroyed his name. He won some of those fights. He never fully recovered from what was done to him. Alice Hawthorne came to Atlanta to watch the Games with her daughter. The park she walked into that night had been built to welcome exactly that kind of person. Someone without a ticket, without credentials. Just a mother and her child looking for a piece of something worth remembering. The openness that made the park so welcoming was exactly what Rudolph counted on. It was February 12, 2010, in Whistler, British Columbia, and the Winter Olympics in Vancouver had not yet officially opened when Georgian luger Nodar Kumaritashvili was killed during a training run at the Whistler Sliding Center. He was 21 years old. Lug had been part of his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had introduced the sport to Soviet Georgia and helped build the first primitive run in Bakuriani in 1970. His father had won a USSR youth championship in it. His uncle served as head of the Georgian Lug Federation. Kumaritashvili had started sliding when he was 13, driven hours across difficult roads to reach World Cup events, graduated from university with an economics degree, and prayed at church before every competition. He was, by every account, exactly the kind of athlete the Olympics were built for. He had also been struggling on the Whistler track. The Whistler Sliding Center was the fastest luge track in the world. During Olympic test events, it had produced speeds that exceeded the designer's own calculations by at least 10 kilometers per hour. The president of the International Luge Federation had written a letter expressing concern after a record speed of nearly 154 kilometers per hour was recorded, saying the figure made him worry and calling it an unreasonable demand on athletes. The track's organizers concluded no action was required. Kumaritashvili had crashed twice during earlier training sessions at Whistler. His average speed across the runs he did finish was slower than what the top sliders were managing on that course. On the morning of February 12th, he was making his final training run before competition was scheduled to begin that evening. He was traveling at 143.6 kilometers per hour when he entered the last curve of the track. He lost control. His sled hit the lower edge of the curve wall, launching him upward and over the sidewall entirely. He struck an unpadded steel support pillar just outside the track at full speed. Medical crews reached him within moments and worked on him at the scene. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital. He was pronounced dead from his injuries shortly after. The footage of the crash was broadcast and then circulated online within hours. There was nothing gradual about what the video showed. One moment, a young man was on his sled, making the small, precise adjustments that sliding athletes spend years learning to feel. The next, he was gone from the frame. Olympic officials and the International Luge Federation stated publicly that the crash resulted from driving errors. Kumaritashvili's father rejected that explanation. The British Columbia coroner, in a report released that September, found that the death resulted from an interaction of factors: the track's exceptional speed, its technical difficulty, and Kumaritashvili's relative unfamiliarity with its specific demands. The coroner noted that during his training runs, it was reasonable to assume Kumaritashvili had been sliding faster than at any point in his life while simultaneously trying to learn how the track behaved. Before competition resumed the following day, the walls at the exit of that final curve were raised. Padding was added to exposed metal beams near the finish line, and the men's start position was moved further down the track to reduce speeds. Officials described these changes not as safety corrections but as accommodations for the emotional state of the remaining athletes. That same evening, the opening ceremony went ahead as scheduled. The 7 remaining members of the Georgian delegation walked into BC Place Stadium wearing black armbands, carrying their flag with a black ribbon tied to it, and left a space open in the procession where Kumaritashvili would have stood. The crowd rose to its feet. He had qualified for these games by competing in 5 World Cup races over 2 years. He had ranked 38th in the world at the qualification deadline. He had earned his place on that track. The question of whether that track deserved him was never cleanly answered. It was August 26, 1960, in Rome, Italy, and the Summer Olympics were in their second week when Danish cyclist Knud Enemark Jensen collapsed during the 100-kilometer team time trial road race and never regained consciousness. Jensen was 23 years old. He had come into the Rome Games with real credentials, having helped Denmark win a silver medal in the team time trial at that year's Nordic Championships. The 100-kilometer road race ran along the Via Cristoforo Colombo outside the city, a long, flat stretch of road that offered no shade and no mercy from the sun. That day, temperatures on the course reached 40 degrees Celsius, or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. 31 riders dropped out before the race was done. The heat was not a surprise. The race had been scheduled for midday anyway. One of the 4 Danish riders, Jørgen Jørgensen, dropped out early from sunstroke, which meant the 3 remaining Danes all had to finish or the team would be disqualified. Jensen told his teammates he felt dizzy. A rider named Niels Bounsø grabbed his jersey to keep him upright. Another rider, Van Bangsborg, sprayed water on him from the other side. For a moment, Jensen seemed to stabilize. Then Bounsø let go of his jersey, and Jensen went down, hitting the scorching road hard enough to fracture his skull. An ambulance brought him to a military tent near the finish line. The temperature inside that tent reached approximately 50 degrees Celsius. Jensen was pronounced dead at 3:30 in the afternoon without having regained consciousness. The immediate explanation was heat stroke, and the physical evidence supported it. The conditions that day were brutal enough to account for a man's death without any other explanation required. But the story that attached itself to Jensen in the days and years that followed was more complicated. The Danish team's trainer, Olaf Jørgensen, told investigators shortly after the race that he had given Jensen and some of the other riders a vasodilator drug called Roniacol before the start. An International Olympic Committee medical advisor named Ludwig Prokop, who was already pushing hard for anti-doping regulations, pointed to Jensen's death as evidence of the danger of performance-enhancing substances and included amphetamines in his public account of what had been given to the Danish team. That version spread quickly and stuck for decades. The autopsy told a different story. 3 Italian physicians completed their examination in March 1961 and reported that Jensen's cause of death was heat stroke and that no drugs were found in his body. One of those doctors later claimed they had found traces of several substances, though the complete autopsy report was never made public. Prokop did not acknowledge that his account had been wrong until 2001, 40 years after the fact. What is certain is this: a 23-year-old cyclist rode until he fell on a sun-baked road outside Rome, in conditions that should have been managed far more carefully than they were. Whether the Roniacol contributed to what happened, whether amphetamines were involved, or whether the heat alone was enough, the officials who scheduled a 100-kilometer road race at midday in August heat were not asking hard questions about what they were asking of the men on those bikes. Jensen's death pushed the International Olympic Committee to form a medical committee the following year and introduce formal drug testing at the 1968 Games. His case became part of the foundation of anti-doping policy in international sport, even though the drug narrative surrounding him was never fully verified and the autopsy pointed elsewhere. The 1960 Rome Olympics are remembered for other things. Cassius Clay, not yet Muhammad Ali, won gold in boxing. Abebe Bikila ran the marathon barefoot through the streets of Rome at night and won. Jensen's name does not appear in those conversations. He arrived in Rome as a medal contender and was gone before the second week ended. It was September 1988 in Seoul, South Korea, and the Summer Olympics were already one of the most turbulent in memory when 2 South Korean boxers competed in bouts from which they would not recover. The 1988 Seoul Games had arrived carrying tension from multiple directions. Ben Johnson's disqualification after testing positive for steroids cast a shadow over the track. Disputed judging in the boxing venue had already produced brawls inside the ring, involving coaches and officials. The boxing competition in particular felt like it was running on the edge of something ungoverned. 2 deaths became linked to fights that took place during those games. The first involved a South Korean boxer named Oh Kwang-soo, who competed during the games and suffered brain injuries during his bout. He died from those injuries in the aftermath. The details of his case were not widely reported outside South Korea, and the record of what happened to him remains less complete than it deserves to be. The second case was a fighter named Kim Jong-il, also South Korean, who sustained a severe head injury during his bout at the Seoul Games. He fell into a coma. He did not come out of it. Brain injuries in boxing do not always announce themselves immediately. A fighter can walk back to his corner, answer questions, appear functional, while blood is slowly pooling inside his skull and pressure is building against the tissue beneath. The moment when something feels wrong is often well past the moment when intervention could have made a difference. Both men followed something close to that pattern. The ring offered no visible sign of how serious things were until it was too late to reverse them. Olympic boxing in 1988 operated under amateur rules. Fighters wore protective headgear. Bouts ran shorter than professional contests. The assumption built into that structure was that these protections lowered the danger meaningfully. But headgear addresses a specific and limited set of risks. It reduces cuts. It cushions surface impact. It does nothing to stop the brain from moving inside the skull when a punch lands with enough rotational force. The injuries that kill boxers are not skin deep. They are the kind that happen in the space between the brain and the bone surrounding it. Invisible from ringside. Invisible even to the fighter absorbing the blow. The deaths at the 1988 Seoul Games were not anomalies in the history of boxing. The sport had always carried this cost. Amateur competition had always tried to draw a line between itself and the professional version, to argue that its rules made the risk manageable. What happened in Seoul complicated that argument in ways that were hard to dismiss because the setting was the Olympics, the largest stage in sport, and the fighters who died were young men who had earned their place there through years of training. In the years following Seoul, the conversations about fighter safety inside Olympic boxing did intensify. Medical protocols were reviewed. The debate over headgear continued long enough that the sport eventually reversed course, removing mandatory headgear from men's Olympic competition in 2016. The reasoning was counterintuitive but research-supported. Headgear may actually increase the rotational forces on the brain by enlarging the surface area that a punch can strike. The 1988 deaths were part of a long and unresolved argument about what safety in boxing actually looks like. The two men who died are rarely mentioned when people recall those games. The moments remembered from Seoul tend to be Florence Griffith Joyner on the track, the sprinting records, the spectacle. Oh Kwang-soo and Kim Jong-il came to compete in front of their home country. They never left the shadow those boots cast over them. 5 games, 5 tragedies, each one different in its origin, but arriving at the same place: terrorism, a bomb hidden under a bench, a track built faster than it was meant to be, a race held in killing heat, a sport whose damage hides until it is too late to stop it. The promise the Olympics make is not a small one. It asks the world to gather, to watch, to believe that competition and ceremony together mean something. Most of the time, that promise survives the 2 weeks it takes to fulfill it. But the names in this video are proof of what it costs when it doesn't. They came to compete, or to watch, or simply to be present for something worth seeing. That was all. And for 11 Israeli athletes, for Alice Hawthorne, for Nodar Kumaritashvili, for Knud Enemark Jensen, for 2 fighters in Seoul, it was enough to put them in the path of something the games could not protect.